A few days ago, Pritam Singh made a suggestion that the government should consider publishing clear year-by-year public spending reports, not just how much money was spent, but in simple structure, spending, program, and results. At first, I didn't think much about it. I always assumed that in places like Singapore, all these numbers were already publicly available on National Statistics website, in budget documents, and somewhere online. I thought if most people don't look at them, it was simply because the data was too technical or mainly meant for economists or researchers. And to be fair, I do occasionally glance at the statistics myself, income data, inequality figures, things like that. But I almost never pay serious attention to government spending outcomes. Not because I didn't care, but because I assumed this was something MPs in parliaments were already tracking closely on our behalf. But once Pritam raised this point, I actually went to check, and I found my assumption wasn't really correct. It's not that the data doesn't exist. Singapore published a huge amount of fiscal and statistical numbers. We have detailed budget books, ministry annual reports, and a database like SingStat. For example, SingStat showed that in 2025, government operating expenditure was around $97 billion, spread across education, healthcare, social development, defense, and many other sectors. But here's the problem. These numbers are presented at a very broad level. They tell you how much was spent by sector or ministry, but they don't clearly show how much went into specific programs and what results those programs actually deliver over time. Take skill training as an example. We know billions are spent every year on workforce upgrading, but as a regular citizen, it's extremely hard to answer a very basic question. How much was spent on a particular training initiative? How many people went through it? And how many actually saw the sustained wage growth or better jobs as a result? Another example is for Singapore, mentioned by Mr. Pritam Singh, announced in Budget 2024, about $40 billion has been committed through 2030, with roughly $5 billion in the first year alone. Yet today, there's no simple, well-publicized public tracker showing how much has been spent so far and what outcomes has been achieved year by year. So, again, this isn't about secrecy. The data is there. The issue is that it spreads across many documents, organized by ministries rather than the programs, and written in a way that makes it very difficult for ordinary people and honestly even MPs to get a clear long-term picture of how taxpayer money has been performed. And this is where I started to see why Pritam's suggestion matters. A mature political system don't just ask, was the money properly accounted for? It also asks, did the money actually work? Without clear spending to result framework, public debate becomes emotional instead of evidence-based. Accountability exists on paper, trust relies on faith rather than a verification. Some people might say, why does this matter? MPs already debate the budget every year. The Auditor General checks the accounts, and the government has a strong track record. All of that is true, but transparency isn't about distrust. It's about democratic maturity. Informed citizens make better judgments, and better judgments leads to more stable politics. And importantly, this kind of report is not unusual internationally. Take New Zealand as an example. Since 2019, New Zealand has published the annual well-being budgets, where major spending programs are explicitly linked to outcomes like mental health, child poverty reduction, and long-term economic well-being. In their first well-being budget alone, about $1.9 billion was allocated to mental health, clearly targeted on service access and population coverage. After that, media scrutiny became more evidence-based. Parliamentary debates shifted away from just arguing about how much money was spent, but towards whether life actually improved. When early data showed gaps, like long waiting time for young mental health services, policies were adjusted rather than simply defended. Of course, this doesn't mean everything worked perfectly. Poorly designed transparency can lead to oversimplification, populist misuse of numbers, or short-term political pressure. These are valid concerns, but they are design problems, not reason to avoid transparency altogether. Personally, I think a clear spending program result report will be very beneficial for Singapore, especially for people like us, citizens who aren't anti-government, but generally want to understand how well policies on housing, healthcare, jobs, and inequality are actually performing. This isn't about attacking the government. It's about helping Singapore move towards a more confident, mature political system where accountability is normal and not threatening.